let's say they were. What would the graduation rate actually be? So to be clear, I'm going to give you 4 different rates: the official, the all for special and general education students, the discharge adjusted, which again we emphasize is a lower bound, it's going to underestimate, and then the GED rate. So here's what we see. The top line is the official rate, right? So this is the line that we've all seen so much. We've heard about in the subways, we've heard about in press conferences and commercials. So it's quite an impressive increase. And what we see when we include special education is there's still an increase. So the graduation rate is 58% for the class of 2007, so somewhat lower than it was before. But we also want to point out that there's still an increase. No matter how you cut it, there's an increase. And the point of this report is not to say that there isn't, but rather that we need more information about what kind of increases we're talking about. The third line down is the discharge adjusted rate. So what you can see, and I think is really fascinating, is this really smooths out the progress. So rather than having this jagged 54 or 58% one-year increase, what you see is a really impressive but much flatter increase in the graduation rate. And then if you further take out GEDs, we end up with a graduation rate of 44%. So what we're saying is the true rate lies somewhere between 44 and 58% for all New York City students. And you can kind of use your metric of choice. If you want to say half are legitimate, then divide by 2. If you want to say 3/4 are, then divide that way. But this is kind of the big story here. Okay, a couple of points. We also looked at school-by-school discharge data. So the Department of Education has always released discharge data for individual schools, and what we've been hearing on the ground is that when schools are closing, that these discharge rates just shoot right up. This could be for a lot of different reasons, but obviously it's of concern because there's still students being served in these schools. So what we did is take the discharge rate for the last graduating class of each of these closing high schools and the penultimate, so the second to last class. And in all cases, except for South Bronx High School, you see the spiking of the discharge rate for the last class. We don't know why this is, but we'd like to know more about kind of what's happening on the ground that's producing, for example, a 55% discharge rate for the last class graduating from Morris. A couple of other findings I'm not going to talk about in detail, but please feel free to ask. We linked these discharge and graduation rates to the school report card grades. So as many of you know, since the fall of 2007, we've been giving schools A to F grades. We found that 1 in 3 New York City high schools, it's about 87 schools, graduation rates would drop by 15 percentage points or more if discharges were counted as dropouts. And again, the same cautionary tale about lower bound here, but that's quite a drop. So what the point is that we have potentially the illusion of a lot better things going on than we should have, but 72% of those schools got A's and B's on their progress reports. So what we're trying to say here is that that system does not de-incentivize schools from discharging students, and in many ways it may even make it more attractive to get rid of students earlier. And Leonie's going to talk later about some of our recommendations around that. We also looked at trends in GED test taking. These have not gone down over time, and in fact there's a sharp increase between the class of the school year of 06-07 and 07-08. Diane's going to talk more about what she's seeing on the ground regarding GEDs. The final part of our report really tries to propose mechanisms that might explain these increases. We look at census data. So we got the assistance of the Queens College demographer who does all the census data for the New York Times, had him look at mobility out of the city, had him look at international migration issues. So, are there more foreign-born students in New York City who are not enrolled in school? It does not appear that there were floods of students, more so in the past, moving out of New York City. It does not appear that there are floods of students doing the circular migration to their home countries. We also looked at parochial school enrollments. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get independent school enrollments, but as many of you have heard in the news, parochial school enrollments have been plummeting. So this really doesn't seem to be an explanation of what's going on. The other two explanations that we put on the table are an increasing fraction of overage students, which Kim's going to talk about, and then this accountability issue, which Leonie's going to talk about. I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Kim.
Hi, my name is Kim Sweet, and I'm the Executive Director of Advocates for Children of New York. I want to thank the Public Advocate for releasing this report and for hosting this event, and I really want to thank Jennifer Jennings and Lady Haimson for aggregating this data and putting out what we think is a very important document. Sure. What is most disturbing to us about this report is that the percentage of students discharged has actually gone up since 2002, which is when Advocate for Children and the Public Advocate brought attention to the discharge problem. We're very disappointed to see that the numbers have actually increased since then. But also another area of grave concern for us is that it appears that the increase in the discharge rate is driven primarily by a doubling of the discharge rate during the first year of high school. So there's a doubling of discharges going on during the first year of high school. And one of the reasons why that's particularly disturbing is that legally, under the law, discharges are allowed only in limited circumstances for students who are under 17. So the question arises, why are so many students being discharged in the first year of high school when, by all assumptions, these students should be under 17? And one of the explanations that we think is a possibility is that more students are leaving middle school significantly over age. So Advocates for Children released a report last summer called Stuck in the Middle, where we talked about how some schools in the Bronx have 26% of their students significantly over age. And we recounted story after story of 17-year-old 7th graders. So one explanation is that more students are entering 9th grade at age 17 or older. So that's something that definitely calls for more investigation, and it's why it's really so important for the Department of Ed to release this data, showing the ages of these students when they're discharged and also showing where they're discharged to. Another just thing I wanted to point out is that vulnerable populations clearly are still easy targets for school push-out. We see it happening with some of our clients at Advocates for Children, particularly clients with special education needs, who are still calling the office and saying that they're being counseled out of school. And in this report, we note with significant concern that the discharge rate has increased for students in self-contained special education classes to the point where I think the number was 23% of students in self-contained special education classes. That's almost a quarter of them for the class of 2007 were discharged. Self-contained special education classes generally refer to classes which consist entirely of students with special needs. So that's in contrast to students who are more integrated with non-general education peers. So, the graduation rate for these students was already low, but if we count these discharges as dropouts instead of discharges, as some of them in fact should be counted as dropouts, then it could go down as low as 6.5% for students in self-contained classes for the class of 2007. And unfortunately, this data does comport with what we already know about students who attend the Department of Ed's self-contained special education classes. And that is that they have really not been a priority, and in fact have been largely ignored under the Children First reform. So these students are graduating at lower rates and appear to also be being discharged at very high rates as well. So we are really pleased to hear that the state controller is going to come in and do an audit of this data because we think it's quite needed. Thank you.